Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under Joab, 1/3 under Abishai, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. That's fun to say. And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, you shall not go out. For if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave order to all the commanders about Absalom. We left off where David is over the Jordan. He had heard word that Absalom was on the way. Remember the two war options? It was Hushai versus Ahithophel, right? And Ahithophel had a really good idea that would have really worked, but Hushai played to Absalom's ego and got his plan that would give David notice and time to get away, and that's the plan Absalom went with. And David knows that he's coming, and that's where we left off, okay? So David's waiting for war is what we're waiting for. And so David is now mustering his army, and he's got 3 commanders, 3 names I hope are familiar. Joab, right? We know him. He's been with David from the start. Abishai, which is another nephew, right? And Ittai, which was the friend that came to David, whose name was with me. Remember? That's him. So what happens here? David says, hey, I'll go to war with you. But Joab specifically is like, no, you're not. Why do you think Joab said no? He gives a reason. The men give a reason. Here's the thing about the reason. The reason is invalid. Kings go to war. That's what they do. So this whole reason of, well, you know, you're going to be the number one thing, and they'll like pursue you wholly and kind of leave us alone. No, that's not true. So what do you think is really going on? Yeah, the father-son element, get that out of the way, right? Dad can't go to war against son. Okay, right? And this is really telling because David, not so quietly, pulls his 3 commanders aside, except for everyone can hear him say what? Go easy on him. That is probably exactly what Joab was trying to avoid. They would not be able to take care of business if David was on the field. That's just the truth. So they leave David behind. Okay, verse 6. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. Here's the thing, David always wins. He seems to always win, right? David's men handedly defeats Absalom's men, but what's really sad is they should all be on the same team. It's really sad. 20,000 Israelites died. That's the truth. And the battle spread over the face of all the country. Here's what's really interesting. The forest devoured more people that day than the sword. That means that God overthrew the coup. That's what it means. It was supernaturally natural. I don't know if it was beast attack, if they all got stuck in the tree. We're going to see that in a minute. If they got disoriented, who knows? But something supernaturally natural was going on, and more people died just from running around in the forest than that anybody actually had killed them. Isn't that amazing? God totally did that. Here's the other thing. Verse 9, Absalom just happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, "Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in the oak." Joab said to the man who was with him, "What, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt." Now hold up, that's not like a belt. You're like, wow, thanks, a belt. Joab's like, listen, I would have rewarded you handily. This belt that Joab is talking about is the girdle of their armor. So remember, the Lord said, put on the belt of truth. This is a belt that would hold the breastplate and the skirt, whatever that thing's called, I can't remember, all together, and all their weapons would hang off this belt, and it was a sign of authority and power. And he's like, I would have given you one of those. That's what he's saying. Not, I'm going to hold your britches up. Here's a belt. That's not it. And the man said to Joab, "But even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Listen, I'm in a lose-lose situation. First of all, I heard David say, don't touch him. Secondly, if I would have, you would have let me take the fall for it. And we know how well it goes when someone touches the Lord's anointed and David hears about it. How many times has that happened? A lot. This guy's like, no way. No way, right? No, we can't really blame him for that. This is sticky. This is a sticky situation. So Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And then 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Here's the thing. There was no way that Absalom was getting out of this alive. First of all, God said that. In chapter 17, verse 14, if you just flip it back one page, remember Hushai's objective was to overthrow Ahithophel's counsel. Remember that? For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. Why did Ahithophel's plan really not fly? Because God said no. This kid is going down. It was already ordained. The judgment for this was already happening. Therefore, the forest devoured the guys. Joab talked David into staying home. Like all these things. Somebody just happened to come across Absalom. All these things. You can see the Lord working because he said in the chapter before, he's not going to make it out alive. There's no scenario where Absalom can come back home now. He has overthrown the kingdom. He has crowned himself king in Hebron. He has gathered the heart of Israel and slept with the girls. There is no turning back from this. He has stuck his claim, and the Lord's like, yeah, that's going to be it. So you can see the natural, the supernatural, people's choices all working together, but really, it's like we talked about last week, God's sovereignty over it all. He had already called this. Absalom was going to die. And he used the tools around him to get it done. Joab, particularly, who is not gracious and fiercely loyal to David. He was not going to let this kid live. There's no way. Verse 16, Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. Absalom was dead now, so he wants to call off the army so there's no more bloodshed, because people are dying. They're falling dead, right? So he calls them in as fast as he can because it's over. No one wants any more Israelites to drop dead. So they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest and raised over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, every one to his own home. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley. This is telling. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. He set up a monument to himself, named himself in the king's valley. That tells you a lot. All right, let's keep going. Verse 19. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, Zadok is who? Pop quiz. There's so many names. I just want to make sure we keep them together. The priest, okay? So this is the PK, the priest kid. Let me run and carry news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of his enemies. Remember, that was his assigned job. Remember, the priest kids, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, their job was to take the messages to the king. And he's like, oh, that's me. I'll take it, right? That was his job. He has one job. He wants to do it. Joab says to him, though, no, you are not to carry this news today. You may carry news another day. But today, you shall carry no news, because the king's son is dead. So Joab turns to this Cushite and says, you go and tell the king what you have seen. So the Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said to Joab, come what may, let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why will you run, my son, seeing that you will have no reward for this news? Come what may, he argues, I will run. So Joab says, go ahead, dude. And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. He's fast. What do you think is going on here? See, here it comes back to the same thing. The ones that bragged about dropping the king's anointed or meddling with all that, David dropped them. They were dead meat. Anybody who tried to bring, remember Saul and the guy who grabbed the trinkets off the battlefield and either did or did not kill Saul. It's really unclear. But he came and bragged about it anyway, and he's like, look, here's his bracelet, here's his crown. He didn't make it. So I think Joab knows, like, nobody, today is not the day. You are not the delivery guy today. You're going to stay right here next to me. Trust me, you don't want to tell David this. But he's insistent and he runs after. I don't know. And he's fast. So he beat him. Look at verse 24. Now David was sitting between the two gates. That's where he should be. Remember the gates? And Absalom was taking it over. The king's in the gate. That's good. And the watchman went up to the roof of the gate of the wall, which is what they did. They had these watchtowers over the gates, and they could see for a while, and they would watch for messengers and armies and all kinds of stuff up on these watchtowers. So there's a guy up there, and he's watching, and he lifts his eyes and looked, and he sees a man running alone. The watchman called out down to the gate and told the king, "Hey, this guy's coming." And David says, the king says, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." And he drew nearer and drew nearer. And then the watchman who's watching the horizon, he sees another man running. And the watchman calls to the gate and says, "See, another man is running alone." And the king said, "Oh, he also brings news." And the watchman said, "I think the running of the first is like Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. He runs really fast. Maybe he runs funny." And the king said, "Oh, he's a good man, and he comes with good news." That's a hint. Joab's like, you can't go. He's going to assume things that are not true, and it's not going to be good for you. But the guy runs too fast. Verse 28, then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "All is well." All is well. It's the first thing he says. And he bowed before the king with the face to the earth and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king." And the king said, "But is it well with the young man Absalom?" That's all he wanted to know. That's telling. We'll get back to that. And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant, your servant, I saw a great commotion, but I do not know what it was." "I take the fifth," he says. And the king said, "Then turn aside and stand here." And he turned aside and stood still. Did he know? I think he was finally getting the clue. Uh-oh, I actually don't want to tell him. So he's really happy the Cushite is hot on his heels because he got out of it. So he's like, "You stand here. Let's hear what the next guy has to say." And so, behold, the Cushite then came and said, "Good news for my lord the king. For the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all who rose up against you." That's true. And the king said to Cushite, "But is it well with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite very smartly, diplomatically says, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man." And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And he went and said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." What's propelling this? And why is he just narrowly focused on Absalom when all of his troops are out there? On either side, it's still his guys. He doesn't take one moment to ask how anybody else is doing. He asked about Absalom twice, and he's clearly upset. Joab's going to intervene in a second, but why is he crying, do you guys think? I think it was, they're father-son, but they don't really have that relationship. I think it's a lot born out of shame and guilt that they're all in this situation and that Absalom ended up dying in this situation. David is grieving, but it's far more than just that his son died. I think it's the whole fiasco of the last 15 years with him. Oh, Absalom, Absalom. Oh, that I would have died instead of you. I think is very telling. I should have died instead of you, or you shouldn't be dead at all. All of this could have been avoided had there been reconciliation, at least. So he's grieving, and it's a misplaced grief. I think it's a true grief. But what are you grieving about, David? And that's what Joab's going to talk to. So check this out. Chapter 19. It was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. Check this out. Listen to this really carefully. It's really sad. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for everybody else. Remember, they had been exiled from Jerusalem because of this coup that Absalom was doing. They had lost now brothers in war. But they got the kingdom back. They got Jerusalem back. It should have been a day of victory, that it had been overthrown. And instead, they are hanging their heads in shame. They don't know what to do. All of them, all of the people, for the people heard that day, the king grieves for his son. That's it. We can't get him off the floor about it. And they don't know what to do with this. It's discombobulating. It's disconcerting. They don't know. And it says, as a people, the people that were exiled with David, who were faithful to David, who fought for David despite it all, and he hasn't been the best guy to follow lately, but they are being faithful to their king. Those people, they stole back into the city, like they're sneaking back in, like they don't belong there, with their faces hung in shame. They're ashamed. So the king then, he's covering his face, and the king cries with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." He's just been on the ground saying the same thing over and over and over again so long, because we saw him do that when the messengers are there. He's still doing it when Joab gets everybody home from battle. Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab steps in. Okay? Joab came into the house of the king, slams the door behind him, and says, "Listen! You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who have this day saved your life." Which is true. If Absalom would have won this battle, David would have died. It would have been a slaughter, just like the other kingdoms. When it changes face, you kill who's a threat. David would have never lived. We've saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you and you hate those who love you. And you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. And this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. So the king got up, and all the people said, "The king's in the gate." This is why the Absalom thing at the gate was such a big deal. It is the top authority to be sitting in the gate. It meant something. David hadn't sat in the gate in years. Joab's like, "You get out of here right now and you go to your people and you speak kindly to them, or I swear not a mighty man who has followed you for 30 years will be here at the end of the night. We are done, David. It was a needed warning. It's stern. He needed it so bad. Somebody to shake him. Joab did right by David. This isn't the first time. David owes a lot to Joab. Joab gets a bad rap. I think it is entirely misplaced. I really do. If you watch the entire history of Joab, yeah, he's harsh. He for sure murdered Abner, remember that? And that other guy, well, actually lots of guys. We're going to see him kill another guy in a minute. But his heart was fiercely loyal to David. And there were many times that David sent Joab out to battle when David should have been with him. And Joab calls back home and is like, if you don't want this victory to go to me, you better get out here and blow a trumpet. He did that all the time. He was in the middle of the Uriah thing. He has been covering for David and at David's side and going to war for David. He shakes David when David needs it, time and time again, to wake him up, slap him across the face. Joab is the guy, and he is up to here. All the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. Now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. But Absalom, who we anointed, is dead. That's a conundrum. Northern tribes. Well, David did good by us, but we decided to crown Absalom, but now Absalom's dead. What do we do? 13. But say to Amasa. Pause. Who's Amasa? Yes. Amasa is Absalom's appointed commander in the coup. Okay? He's not very good at war. He's not very good at his job, but that's who he was. He was Absalom's commander. David says, tell Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of my army now in place of Joab. One disclaimer, the Hebrew is a little weird about the word like displaced. It's more like demoted, which makes more sense because Joab's still in the mix. But he does not have the status that he had before. Amasa took it. Amasa, Absalom's commander. This is a diplomatic move by David to unite the tribes back together. I know. I'll put Absalom's commander at the top of my army. That will help bridge the gap between us. That's what's going on. It's a diplomatic move. Well, you don't have Absalom, but you can have your commander as my top commander and trying to get the 12 tribes back together because right now we are separated. We've got civil war. He swayed the hearts of the men of Judah as one man so that they sent word to the king, return both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet to the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. Judah's back on board. Shimei. Who was Shimei? Yes, the rock guy, the curse guy. Remember him? You're a murderer. You're worthless. You've killed all the house of Saul. Remember him? This is him with his tail between his legs. Shimei, the Benjamite, hurried to come down with the men of Judah. He's running with Judah. He's like, I'm in a lot of trouble. So he's with Judah coming to David, right, to meet King David. And with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin. Benjamin, Saul's home base. the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, Shimei is in hot water. His puppet king didn't make it. He doesn't know what to do. So he's bringing 1,000 guys from Benjamin to David. And Ziba, who was that? Pop quiz. Mephibosheth's servant, right? I told you all these names would come back to haunt us this week. Here they are, okay? With his 15 sons and his 20 servants, they also rushed down to the Jordan before the king. So all these people are running back to David, the same people. Shimei fully cursed him. Ziba bamboozled him by telling a story about Mephibosheth. Remember that? Okay, they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household. Here, let me carry your luggage for you. Across the Jordan, okay, and to do his pleasure. I will also rub your feet. Okay, and Shimei fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan and said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" That's a valid question. Okay, we've seen that before. Shouldn't he, off with his head? Right? But David said, "What do I have to do with you, the sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be as an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am the king over Israel?" And the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. Then, check this out, Mephibosheth, remember him? The son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. What does that tell you?
He stinks.
He stinks. That is exactly what I got from it. He stinks. More to the point, he's fasting and mourning and waiting for David to get back, it seems. Right?
Sounds like Ziba's a liar.
Yeah, and Mephibosheth probably thought, David's not coming back. Right? So Mephibosheth, his state right now is saying that everything in his life was on pause while David was out there, while this was all going on. But it says, when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me," which is Ziba, right? "For your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king. Your servant is lame. I literally needed a wheelchair to get to you, and Ziba took off." Right? That's what he's saying. "He has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like an angel of God." That might be a little much. "Yes, do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king? You've done so much for me already," he says. And the king says, "Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land." Another diplomatic move. You guys, this is 3 in a row. You guys see this? He's like, fine, you get half, you get half. Is that what should have happened? No. The guy stole this from Mephibosheth. David should have been like, "Are you for real?" At least Mephibosheth should have got his stuff back. Mephibosheth said to the king, "O Lord, let him take it all, since you're home safe. I don't care. I care about you. Man, this is rough, you guys. It really is. I want to get to the application part. I think it's going to take the rest of the time. So I'm going to trust you guys read the rest of the story, right? Okay, so Barzillai comes to David. David invites him to come live in Jerusalem with him and basically eat at his table and be there. He refuses, right? And says, I'm old. I can't eat anything. I can't taste anything anyway. And he opts to go home to what's comfortable, right? And lives out the rest of his life. Okay, that happens. And then there's more of this uprising going on. And that sets the stage for the Civil War. This little paragraph right here in the end of 19. And then chapter 20 happens. Okay, what happens in chapter 20? Okay, there's a worthless man named Sheba, who's a Benjamite. He's part of Saul's crew, saying, we have no portion with David. We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, right? So then all of Israel withdraws from David again, and you've got split tribes. Judah, Israel. Now they're with Sheba. They're like, oh, and goes with Sheba. Judah stays with David, okay? Then David goes home. He deals with the 10 concubines who got raped and abandoned by David, right? Puts them away. That's all he can do. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Then the king calls Amasa and asks him to swiftly deal with Sheba. Amasa was late to his first day on the job, right? He's completely unreliable. He was late to where David told him to be. So Joab's like, yep, I got it, right? And Joab steps back in. He kills Sheba. David says nothing about it, and he gets his job back with no comment. I think because Amasa was a fully diplomatic move that didn't work. The Civil War is back on. It didn't work. David actually needs Joab in that position. Clearly, this Amasa guy is not a warrior. He can't even show up to work on time. So Joab takes care of it again. It wasn't right, but he did it, right? Takes care of the guy. And then at the end, it says, verse 23, now Joab was the command of all the army of Israel. He gets his job back. And that's our text. Is it getting better? No. It's kind of been a downhill, slippery slope for a while, right? All right. So the question is, where's Jesus? And what can we learn from these chapters? That's what we want to know, right? I do have some things. I was like, and good night. I do have a few things. I think 4 points, if you guys want to take notes. I've got 4 things. You guys ready? All right, here we go. Here's what I got for you. Number 1, watch where you step. Watch where you step. Chapter 18, chapter 19, the end of chapter 18 and the first of 19, David's countenance and response to Absalom's death. This misplaced grief that he was showing, it rocked the entire nation. It affected everybody. The way that he was handling the death of Absalom. Joab calls him out, right? David, dude, you've got to get it together. You have to. You're going to lose your army. You're going to lose your people. These people saved your life. They saved your kids' lives. They would have all been dead, David. And I'm telling you, I tell you what, You don't pick it up right now, you're going to lose us too. You're warriors who have stuck by you, right? This countenance of David, it was wise advice from Joab. It really was. Here's the thing I'm reminded of is that we all lead someone. It was a really good reminder for me that we are all leading someone. Someone is watching you. Somebody is following in your steps. Somebody is. The question is, where are we leading them? David is not good at leading in the right direction right now. He's going to pull up, I promise. It's going to be glorious. But right now, everywhere he steps is a misstep. And the problem is he's got a lot of little feet coming up behind him. So many. Here's a verse. Galatians 5:25 says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. I love this verse. Let us also keep in step with the Spirit. What's really awesome about this is the keep in step is a military term. It means to proceed in a row as the march of a soldier, to go in order. It's a military term. Paul says, if you live by the Spirit, then you march in the steps of your general. You walk in the steps of your general. You keep in step with the Spirit, which is easier said than done, right? To live in the Spirit and walk in the Spirit every day. But I love this idea of marching along in the shadow of the Spirit. We need to do that, you see. Ephesians 5:1-2, to build on this, says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children. The Father walks and we follow. We walk in the footsteps as little kids do, as children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. What did Jesus say? Dozens of times. Follow me. Follow me, Jesus said. Follow me. Do as I do. Step where I step. Avoid what I avoid. Keep in step. Follow me, which means he goes first. And we follow behind. Paul said this to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. That is what we call discipleship. Follow me as I follow Christ. What is Paul saying? I am going to, by God's grace, keep in step with the Spirit. Follow me, Jesus said. Paul says, I am, by the grace of God, following Jesus. You follow me as I follow Christ. Which means Paul has his disciples following in the same footsteps Paul is, which is the same footsteps of Jesus. That's called being a leader. Discipleship. Leadership. Be imitators of Christ so that with great humility and fear and trepidation, you say to someone else, follow me as I follow Christ. It's discipleship. It's a huge, huge task. Discipleship, you see. Notice the order that Paul says, though. Follow Christ, right? then when they follow you, they are also following Christ. That's the point. Not that you are gathering people that are following you, but that they are following Christ as they follow you, so that you can step out of the way and they are still in step with the Spirit. Yeah, and the burden of that is on David, right? Joab, his mighty men, his family, all of Israel is walking in his steps. We saw the people shamefully returning back to the city. Why? Because David was shameful. And Joab comes, and you can just pull it in a nutshell and say, David, watch your step. Watch your step. Leadership, you see. Watch your step. That's number one. Number two, ready? Watch what you seek. Watch what you seek. Barzillai, which we skimmed over, but I'm assuming you guys read it, used his riches for the kingdom. We saw that when he brought gift baskets to David, right? And he's going to do it again. And he actually goes down as a guy that was generous. He's wealthy. He's old. He's wealthy. And he used it for David to support them. But he wouldn't leave it to follow the king. He went home. Instead, we are to seek first the kingdom of God, and all these other things will be added to us, right? He went home. Barzillai was invited to come to the king, to live in Jerusalem and eat at his table, and he wouldn't do it. Here's the thing. Luke 12 says this, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Barzillai wanted what was familiar around him. He pretty much said that. Nah, I'm going to go home. I'm going to live out the rest of my years where it's familiar, right? At home. I can't taste anything anyway. Dude, you're invited to live at the palace, to be next to the king at the king's table. He's like, He goes home. He wanted familiar and stability. Here's the thing. Isaiah 33:6 says this of the Lord, "And he will be the stability of your times." The Lord. Abundance of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is Zion's treasure. He is your stability. The Lord is. I think he might have missed this. How awesome would it have been to live out the rest of his days at the king's table, and he missed it. Totally a cool guy. One of the only characters that is like, dude, that guy's got it straight. But he didn't go with the king. So watch what you seek. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else will be added to you, you see. So, next one. Watch what you sow. Watch what you sow. We were talking about the seed earlier over here. That's what we're talking about. Watch what you sow. The 10. The concubines who were left behind to dust and do the laundry and whatever it is, keep house, abandoned by David, raped by Absalom. David couldn't restore them to the harem. They had been defiled. He can't benefit them as a wife. They've been defiled. He can't divorce them. There's no legal grounds. They've been violated, not unfaithful. David had to put them away, just like his daughter was. No offspring. It's a death sentence. No inheritance. Trash. He put them away. Sowing seeds of sin has many consequences. You always reap what you sow. Here's the thing, we know that. Here's something more. You always reap more than you sow. A seed, in Jesus' parable about the seed, when it fell on good soil, multiplied 30, 60, 100-fold. One seed, right? One seed on the ground, it multiplied. A single apple seed multiplies into a tree that produces bushels of apples. One seed. You always reap more than you sow, you see. In the same way, though, Hosea 8, verse 7 says that if you sow to the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. The sowing and reaping, it goes either way. Which seed did you put in the ground? Because you will always sow more than you reap. Good or bad. That's just the truth. Here's another thing. You always reap in kind. Turn to Genesis chapter 1. It's really hard to find. But I bet you guys could do it. Check this out. It's the law of the seed. Genesis chapter 1. Dude, we got to do that study on the seed. It comes up all the time. Genesis chapter 1. Check this out. It's the law put in place at the Garden of Eden. Chapter 1, verse 11. Look at this. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, right? I lost my place. In which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. Listen to the repetition in this. It's really important. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, which is according to their kind. And God said that it was good. And the evening and the morning was the third day. Listen, if it's a vegetation, it's going to yield vegetation. If it's an apple tree, it's going to yield apple trees. It is going to be according to its kind. That is the way the seed was created at the beginning. Seeds reap in kind. If you plant corn, you get corn. If you plant poison oak, you get poison oak. Poison oak does not turn into apples. What you put in the ground will reap its kind. It's the consequence of the DNA in the seed itself. You always reap more than you sow, and what you sow will reap its kind, good or bad. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. The seed bears its own kind. And whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. That is its own kind too. What you sow in the flesh you will reap in the flesh. What you sow in the Spirit, you will reap in the Spirit. It's good or bad. Here's the thing. When we sin, we think we can hide a seed in the dirt. And you do it by yourself, and it's in the dark, and it's under the dirt, and no one can see it. It's done in secret. It's done in private. That's what we think. But that seed sprouts, and it grows. What we tell ourselves is, this sin is mine. It's not hurting anyone else. But that's not so. It couldn't be further from the truth. Luke 8:17 says this, for there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Watch what you sow, good and bad. Watch what you sow. Okay. Number 4, watch who you serve. This is the last one. Watch who you serve. Absalom was shiny, handsome, smooth, relevant, present, diplomat, politician, great hair. So that got him hung up on his hair. He was all the things that cheered Israel to say, we want a king. This is the very sentiment they chanted when they shoved Jehovah aside and put Saul on the throne. Same thing. We want a king. We want a different king. We want a new, shiny, handsome, tall king. This king isn't cutting it, you see. David, too, in analogy, was shoved aside. He is the anointed one, which in Hebrew means Messiah, right? He's shoved away by Absalom in type, in picture. Anything lifted in our hearts above Jehovah is the king we put on the throne of our hearts. Anything. It's called idolatry. In seasons of our life, the Lord is distant, maybe feels a little oblivious, definitely silent, and we walk through these desert days of our soul that are really hard, and we wonder where he is or what happened or where did I go wrong? And that is when we are the most vulnerable to say, we want a king. 1 John 2:16 says this, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world. Look at that list. You could almost summarize everything in those 3 lines. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, what we want, right? Covetousness, the pride of life. You can wrap up a lot of sin in those 3 little sentences, right? These are not of the Father. Watch that. It's of the world. If you feel like what's going on in your heart is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, or the pride of life, you may be well on the way to saying, I want another king. Another king. Instead, check this out. Matthew 22:37 says this. Love the Lord your God. You guys know this? With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, right? Instead, even when he's absent, quiet, maybe seems oblivious, our job is to press in more and love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. If you love the Lord with all your heart, you won't fall to the pride of life. If you love the Lord with all your mind and all your strength and all your soul, you will not fall for the lust of the eyes. If you walk by the Spirit, you can't satisfy the desires of your flesh. It's impossible. It's one or the other. You're feeding one or the other. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 10, and then we'll close. Now, Israel, what does the Lord God require of you? Pause. Don't you want to know that? What does the Lord God require of me anyway? Can I get a list? Yeah. Here it is. You guys ready? Fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to keep his commandments and statutes, which I am commanding you today for your good. What does the Lord require of you? Real simple. Make a list. Fear the Lord, walk in his ways, love him, serve him with all your heart and all your soul, follow his word. Behold, the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose your offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Listen, the Lord owns the earth, the heaven of heavens, yet he chose to set his love on you, Israel. Same is true for the church, same is true for us. The Lord chose to set his love on us. What does the Lord require of us? Who do we serve? It's a good reminder. Watch your step. Watch what you sow. Watch what you seek. Watch who you serve. These chapters are exhortative for these things. It's a heart check. It's a flag on the field. It's a mile marker. Take a pulse. I did. I had a lot of work to do in these 4 areas. It's a good heart check. These chapters, they're exhortative. We can learn some lessons.